This is Trey Alvey with your 28storms.com, Thursday, September 12th, 2013 evening update. We have a lot to talk about, so we'll get down to it. Starting off, we have Hurricane Umberto in the eastern Atlantic, which has been a hurricane for the past day or two now, and is continuing to move off towards the north, eventually turning back more towards the west, but it should turn more towards the north once again beyond 5 days, and right now it does not look to be any threat to the U.S. mainland. Farther towards the west, we have another invest in the central Atlantic, now given a 10% probability of development within 48 hours and 20% probability of development within the next 5 days. Farther towards the northwest, we have Gabrielle, which has re-intensified into a tropical storm and is continuing to move off towards the northeast and should accelerate within the next day or two and kind of start to move out of the picture. And now back further towards the west, closer to the U.S. mainland in Mexico, we have Tropical Depression 10, which was just recently designated in the Bay of Campeche. Real quick, here is a visible satellite image of Gabrielle in the western Atlantic, continuing to move off towards the north. You can see the naked low-level circulation with deep convection displaced off towards the north and northeast. This is due to strong vertical wind shear, which has been impacting Gabrielle for the past several days, and it actually is expected to dissipate within the next 24 to 48 hours due to even a further increase in the vertical wind shear. So we're pretty much dismissing the system at this point, and the rest of the focus for this video presentation will be newly formed Tropical Depression 10 within the Bay of Campeche. And here now is a look at the latest visible satellite image of newly formed Tropical Depression 10. You can see pretty decent circulation, somewhat broad at this point, but we do have new convection firing near the center and displaced farther towards the southwest as well. And it does have an improving satellite appearance, and I would expect this to improve even more so in the next 24 to 48 hours. And here's the latest track for Tropical Depression 10, currently centered in the southern to central Bay of Campeche, expected to move very slowly towards the west and eventually kind of making this almost little loop-de-loop in the next 24 to 48 hours. The general thinking, though, is very slow motion within the southern to central Bay of Campeche over this time frame. And then as it develops and becomes a stronger tropical cyclone, a moderate tropical storm, at least currently forecasted by the National Hurricane Center, it should pick up a little bit of forward speed and move more towards the west-northwest or even northwest towards anywhere from the Mexico coastline all the way up to Brownsville, Texas. These are the latest spaghetti plots for the late cycle model tracks, and you can see generally pretty good agreement that will have a very slow forward speed within the next 24 to 48, even 72 hours potentially in the southern Bay of Campeche or even the far southwestern Gulf of Mexico. Beyond that time frame, it does look like an increase in forward speed. Those models which do maintain a track over water do pick it up towards the northwest and then generally back towards the west as it kind of feels that ridging that's been over Texas for much of this summer, and that kind of shoves it back off towards the west. But we'll get more into that a little bit here with a more detailed look at the steering flow in a minute. The GFS ensemble tracks are also showing a fairly similar story. Very slow forward speed, 24 to 48 hours, followed by a more northwestward movement. However, one important thing to point out, the GFS ensembles are showing overall a much slower movement even through 96 to 120 hours. This would allow more time over water, and given the anticipated favorable upper level conditions, this would allow for additional intensification than what is currently being forecasted by the National Hurricane Center. These are the current forecasted model intensities. You can see there's actually a pretty large spread starting as soon as the 48 to 60 hour time frame, with some of the models not even showing tropical storm strength and some showing strength as strong as possibly even a borderline Category 1 hurricane. So right now there is high uncertainty as far as intensity goes, but overall the upper level pattern looks very conducive for additional intensification if Tropical Depression 10 and potentially future Ingrid remains far enough over the water. Going on in now to some more detailed looks at the model forecast. This is the 12Z European model, and this is the 850 millibar vorticity plotted, starting out at the 0 hour. If we move on to the 24-hour time frame, you can see we have a tropical cyclone in the southern to central Bay of Campeche. If we move that further in time to 48 hours now, you can see actually it jumps a little bit farther towards the north now into the central Bay of Campeche or even far southwestern Gulf of Mexico. Moving on even further to the 72-hour time frame, still offshore, just offshore of near Tampico, Mexico, actually a little bit northeast of there it looks like, and now beginning to make that turn more towards the west. And then by 96 hours, it has moved inland between Tampico and Brownsville, Texas. Now taking a look at the most recent 18Z run of the GFS, it initializes fairly well with our vortmax in the southern Bay of Campeche. And as we move forward with time, you can see the vortmax kind of meanders in that general vicinity. And you can see it really starting to intensify now in the far southern Bay of Campeche. But as we begin to get into around the 3-day time frame, it begins to swing back towards the northwest now. And now you can really see that northwestward movement targeting the far northern Mexico coastline, with landfall in about 100 to 120 hours, which would be about 4 to 5 days from now. And just another thing I'd like to point out real quick, if I can move this back real quick. You can see overall the very favorable upper level conditions. These are the 200 millibar winds that we also have plotted on here. And you can see the very favorable upper level anticyclonic pattern. And to us, this would indicate the potential for additional intensification even beyond what the National Hurricane Center is anticipating if Tropical Depression 10 can remain over water for at least a few days. If it does so, then I definitely think there's a good possibility that we could be dealing with a hurricane in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico. So just to wrap things up real quick now, it does appear Tropical Depression 10 will likely become Tropical Storm Ingrid within the next 12 to maybe 24 hours, maybe even a little bit sooner than that. And generally a slow, even erratic track throughout the Bay of Campeche in the next 48 hours. And beyond that, it looks like generally the consensus is a track towards the northwest. And right now it looks like anywhere from the northern Mexico coastline to southern Texas really need to keep an eye on this. And right now the biggest worry and the biggest threat will be very heavy rainfall, particularly in those regions as we move into the extended range. And as always, thank you for tuning in, and keep up with us for additional updates and more videos in the future as Ingrid develops and as we get a better idea on the ultimate track that Ingrid will take.